Right, so we're being live streamed. So if you want to do your intro, John.
Yeah, no, yeah, but we're not on Facebook yet.
Yes, we are.
Yes,
we are not on Facebook yet.
Well, I think we are.
Oh, right. And no, it just says it's recording. Are we on Facebook, Waleed?
Well, it says custom. Yes.
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are.
In that case, ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, and assembled company, wherever you are in this big wide world, welcome to the World Storytelling Cafe, and it is Sunday. It is, in fact, that other Sunday, and it is the Worldwide Story Round, hosted by the inimitable Mike Rust. Over to you, Mike. And I'm going to try and get a more better sound.
Right, John, you're breaking up a bit. Okay. Right. Right. I think we're there. So, Janet, I'm going to talk for a bit and then you're going first, if that's okay. If you can hear me, put your thumb up. Right. Okay. So welcome to everybody here. I'm sat here in the UK as I normally am. It's minus. We're having ice days and things, and it's really cold, but it's the middle of winter. The snowdrops are up, which are the small little white flowers that we have that are the harbinger to the spring. So it's 6 weeks from now, it's March. And here in England, maybe not in Scotland, but here in England, in the wussy south, as people would say, south of the border. We are 6 weeks away from the daffodils being here, and away we go, and everything else. So I'm going to go to Janet first, and then I'm going to go to Lucy Taylor next, if that's all right. Lucy, just nod, and then I'll do a batting order, and we'll take it from there. So if you mute everybody as always, I see you all muted apart from me, and Despina, you're not muted. And then I'm going to go over to Janet, and Janet, you are muted, so you need to unmute.
Right. You want me to go right now? Okay. This is a story I like to tell just at the beginning of the year. It seems a story of hope to me. And it's to do with Varenka, who lives in Russia. And she lives in a small cottage, a very plain, ordinary cottage, quite close to the forest. The cottage has a table, it has the chair, it has her bed, and it has a small room just for the animals. And she lives there alone. The cottage is situated, excuse me, my phone. The cottage is situated by the pathway through the woods. So it's quite frequent that Varenka will have come to her door people who are passers-by, people who are maybe tired, people who are hungry, people who are thirsty. And so she will bake for them some Russian bread, maybe some stolich, and she will give them hot, sweet, black Russian tea. And then they will go on their way. It was in the wintertime that Varenka noticed that the passers-by were becoming greater in number. And they were, some of them carrying larger packs on their back. And some of them had carts with household goods in them. And this made her ask, where are you going? What are you doing? And the answer was, we're coming from the east and we're moving westwards because there's fighting and we are fleeing. And as the winter got deeper and colder, more and more refugees passed by her house. And many would say, Varenka, Varenka, pack up your goods and come with us. And she would say, no, I will not. Because the more people who pass, the more who will need bread and tea. And she was right. And one person who knocked on her door was an elderly man carrying in his arms a nanny goat. A nanny goat, because the nanny goat was in Kidd. She could go no further, weak and tired. And so Varenka invited Pyotr to come in and eat bread and drink tea. And he could stay, she said. He could stay in the little room at the back as long as he needed. And that night, just before Varenka went to bed, she knelt in her plain little cottage and she looked at the icon on the wall. The icon. She bowed before it and she said her prayers very quietly to herself. And then out loud she said, Lord, let there be a miracle. Build a wall across the front of my cottage. So when the soldiers come by, they will not see it. They will not know that I am here. They will not know that Pyotr is here with his kidding nanny goat. And in the morning, when she woke up, looked out of the window, was there a wall? No wall. The people streamed by, and one knocked at the door and said, I have on my back a wooden box. It is all my life is in that wooden box. Let me in, I'm weary, it's heavy. And she let him in. And this was Stefan. Stefan, the artist. In his wooden box was his whole life. His canvases, his brush, his oils, his colours. I can't go further. I can't go further. And Varenka said, of course you may stay. If you're willing to share the back room with Pyotr and his nanny goat. Well, Stefan said, of course. And that night, when Varenka said her prayer, she said her personal prayer, and then out loud, in front of the icon, she begged that the Lord would build a wall that would go across the front of her cottage, and the soldiers would pass by and they would not see her. And Pyotr and his nanny goat and Stefan and Varenka would be safe. And she slept. In the morning, she woke and she opened the shutters, and was there a wall? No, there was no wall, no miracle. More refugees going by in the snow, cold, windy. And they passed on. They begged that Varenka would follow, but she would say, no, somebody will need me. Pyotr needs me. Stefan needs me. I will not go. And so she stayed. And as the nights grew darker, the snowstorms got heavier. There was a very, very faint knock at the door. At first, Varenka thought, no knock. Stefan said yes. Pyotr said yes. A knock. She opened the door, and standing there in the doorway was a small girl holding a crudely fashioned birdcage, and in that birdcage, a small white and grey bird. She stood there shivering. Of course, Varenka took her in her arms, brought her in, and said, stay. Hot black tea, sweet. I've even got some stolish for you. Bella sat. And Bella said, the birdcage I made from fallen twigs. I made because my bird, my companion here, well, he was wild, she was wild. She was injured. If I had left her lying there, what would the soldiers have done? You know what the soldiers would have done. I know. And Bella knew. So I took the bird, I put it in the cage, I brought it with me. I have nothing more. Just me and the bird. Well, Varenka could see that Bella was cold and tired and weary. Varenka could see that Bella needed somewhere to stay, and offered her the warmth of her plain, ordinary cottage. And of course, Varenka was so pleased that she would stay. She could stay, she did stay. And that night, before Varenka went to bed, she knelt before the icon and she prayed her quiet prayers. Out loud, she asked the Lord to build a wall around that cottage so that the soldiers, who she knew they were close by, because could hear the thundering of the cannons. You could almost smell the carbide. And she slept. And in the morning when she woke, she felt a difference. Can you hear silence? Varenka could hear silence. There was no sound of the cannons. And yet she could hear something. She could hear a scrunch, 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 scrunch. She began to open the windows. She began to push open the shutters, but she couldn't. And she began to hear a squeal, a squeal. Now, I don't know if I've made the right sounds. The sounds of soldiers marching by, the sound of cannon being pulled behind in a carriage. Well, that's what was passing without seeing the cottage. For during the night there had been a great snowstorm. A great wind had caused that snow to drift and build a wall of snow against the cottage. So the soldiers could not see. They could not see that there was a cottage there, a cottage with 4 people inside, a cottage which may have been ready for looting. They passed by further to the west, leaving Piotr and Stefan, Varenka and Bella safely behind. In time, the snow drifted away softly and melted away softly as snow does. And the spring came. That was Nanny Goat kidded too, 2 beautiful kids. Stefan took out his colours, the colours of life, and began to paint something bright and cheerful over the walls. And when it was warm enough, Bella opened the door of the bird cage, and the bird, now healed, grey and white dove, flew out as a signal for peace. And it is said that the 4 of them thrived and flourished together the rest of the year and beyond. Thank you.
Oh, I've got that. Yeah. That was lovely, Janet. Thank you very much. That was beautiful. Absolutely loved it, all of it. Yes, that's great. It's a lovely winter story full of snow and all sorts of things. Just right. So we're going to go over to Lucy Taylor. So I think we've got to do with aliens and things we normally do have. So over to you, Lacey. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Lucy. Yeah, Lucy.
The zombies. I was born in Planet Garden, one of the most beautiful planets in the galaxy. Our main hobby was gardening, and we had beautiful gardens in front and back of houses, of palaces, of schools. We also had big parks with gardens, and people will flock to have something to eat and enjoy the view. But a new virus emerged that destroyed the brain quickly. It was called the brain virus, and 4 million people died. There were mass funerals and mass graves. But as it turned out, dying of the brain virus was just half the story. Planet Garden has been plunged into mourning as 4 million people had died of the brain virus. And then, after 7 days, the unthinkable happened. People that were in their graves rose back and were walking in the streets, in parks, millions of them. It was in the news. The brain virus, who has claimed 4 million people, has now risen them from their graves, and now they are the undead zombies. They like to bite you, to eat you, to infect you. And bullets are not good because they are already dead. And if you try explosives, that's not very good either, because fragments of the zombies, bits of leg or whatever, will carry on living as zombies, so they can still infect people. It is our biggest crisis yet. Thousands of journalists were filming what was happening from helicopters because they were afraid of the zombies. And on TVs, people were watching the news and millions of zombies doing their thing. And some of the relatives recognized some of the zombies as somebody they knew. My mom, my son, my husband. They were in shock because the zombies looked like monsters. Pale gray skin, large blisters with paws, and they were very aggressive. Many of the relatives collapsed in shock. The government decided to capture a group of zombies and examine their brains. They took them to a high security facility, and scientists opened the brain and found that there were no human cells. All there were virus particles. So the zombies were not human. They were virus, full-blown, and they could be destroyed legally. And the best bet to destroy them was to burn them to death. The government explained this to the people, that the zombies were not human and should be destroyed because they would infect the rest of the population. But people didn't want that. The zombies, many of them were their relatives. There had to be another, more humane way. And they protested and they complained. And the government decided to reach a compromise. They would imprison 4 million zombies in high security cells. And prison guards will feed them from afar because they were afraid. Then, as time passed by, the brain virus lost power. And there were not so many new cases of zombies. But the ones that were in prison were becoming stronger because the virus in their brains was evolving. And the scientists told the government, it is just a matter of time, and 4 million zombies in prison will escape to infect the rest of the population. You really have to destroy them now. But the government said, we will deal with it if it comes to that. And it came to that. The zombies, 4 million of them in prison, escaped, and now stronger, were able to infect 4 healthy citizens. So now Planet Garden had 8 million zombies, and they were destroying Planet Garden. There were only 2 million healthy people, and they were the soldiers, the army of General Incinerator. General Incinerator was a tall man with brown, spiky hair, green eyes, and who wore military uniforms with plenty of pockets. In the pockets, he had lots of bottles of things that could make fire. And also he had very strong, large nets in his pockets. He and his 2 million strong army every day without fail will target groups of zombies, will capture them with the nets and then set them on fire. It was the only way to get rid of them. But 2 million people had to face 8 million zombies. And it took time, years, but eventually they managed to destroy all the zombies. Now they wanted to rebuild Planet Garden to its former glory. And that took time too. But as time passed by, they realized that they were getting there. General Incinerator was hailed a superhero. And this little song was always sung to him. There are so many zombies, it hurts my mind and soul. But you are the simple truth and very powerful too. There are no zombies in you. No need to attack the living, because you represent the very best there is. The very best there is. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you very much indeed. Brilliant. Right. We'll go over to Baba, you're next. We're going Baba, Despina, Donald, Norman, if he comes back. And then we're Susan and Valentina and Keith. So Baba next, then Despina. Despina, you look very much as if you've got a power cut and you're sat outside with a hood on and things. Is everything all right in Greece? You know, it hasn't been all been cut off and you've got power.
Everything is all right in Greece, but it's 9:30 and everybody's sleeping in my home, so
That's how
You
it
haven't
is.
turned into a zombie or something.
not yet, not yet.
Right, okay. So we're going Baba, Despina, Donald. So Baba,
Okay,
are you there?
so my screen may flicker in and out, but I'll continue because it appears that my my audio is consistent. All right,
Okay.
so
Yeah, no, you keep going.
So Anansi, as everyone probably knows by now, is one of my favorite characters. And I love Anansi tales. And I recently came across a Jamaican version of how all the tales became Anansis. I'm dealing with a challenge. And the challenge is that I've told other versions of Anansi and how all the stories became Anansi stories so much that it keeps trying to take over even during my new rendition. However, let's see what happens. And this tale comes from a book called Anansi the Spider-Man by Philip M. Sherlock. And it's called From Tiger to Anansi. Now, you see, a long time ago, Tiger was king of the forest. And everything, when people sat together, they held and talked and laughed, and the snake would ask, who is strongest of all? And everybody would say, Tiger is strongest. Said the dog, said the snake, said the birds, said the frogs. Everyone agreed that Tiger was strongest of them all. Because when Tiger whispers, the trees listen. When Tiger is angry and cries out, the trees tremble. So Tiger is strongest of them all. And then who is the weakest of all, said Snake. Anansi, said the dog. Anansi. And they all laughed. I don't know what kind of animal that was, but anyhow, they all sort of laughed. Anansi is weakest of all. When he whispers, no one listens. And when he shouts, everyone laughs. Now, one day, the weakest and the strongest came face to face. And Anansi said to Tiger, I want to talk to you for a minute. And Tiger looked to his left and his right and all but ignored Anansi. Hello, Tiger, good morning. I have a favor to ask. And what is it, Anansi, said Tiger. What could you possibly ask of me? Well, we all know that you're strongest of all. That's why we give your name to so many things. We have tiger lilies and tiger stories and tiger moths and tiger this and tiger that. But everyone knows I'm the weakest of them all. You're the strongest and everything is named after you. I want something named after me. Just one little thing. Just one little thing. And what would that be? Would you please let the stories bear my name? And the trees were trembling. Let the stories bear your name. Yeah, let the stories bear my name. And so that when people tell stories in the evening, and when people tell stories to their children, and when people tell stories before going to bed, they'll say all the stories belong to me. Now, Tiger liked those stories. And he liked the fact that they were named after. In fact, Tiger liked the fact that almost everything was named after him. And he wasn't willing to give up the story. Oh, no, not the stories. He said, well, Anansi, I'll tell you what. You bring me Brother Snake to me alive, and I will let all the stories belong to you. Bring Snake to you alive? I'll do it. Oh, of course you will. Now, away with you. I have better things to do. So Anansi went home that night, and he was pondering. For those of you who have never pondered, that means he was thinking really hard. And he was pondering, and he came up with an idea. So Monday morning, he got up and he built a trap. It was a noose on the ground, and he put some berries inside the noose, and he covered the noose with leaves and only left the berries uncovered because he knew that Snake loved himself some berries. And he hid behind because he was going to pull on the noose and trap the snake and then take the snake to Brother Tiger, and all the stories would be named after him. Well, Snake. Oh, wait a minute. I can do better than that. He wasn't a rattlesnake, but we're going to give him rattles anyhow. So Snake slithered along the ground. He saw the berries, and he helped himself to the berries, and Anansi pulled on the trap. But Snake was too big and too heavy, and the vines broke, and Snake went about his way. Said Anansi, as Baba C's image blinked in and out again. And he thought, and he thought, and he pondered, much like Donald's pondering now. And he thought, and he thought, and he pondered, and then he came up with another idea. And he built what's called a fly-up. Now that's a trap that when you trip it, a noose comes around you and it flings you up in the air and leaves you dangling. Huh. Well, Snake, he put some yams in the middle of the fly-up to entice the snake. And Snake saw the yams and he saw the tie-up and he knew something wasn't right. So he just raised himself up and then lowered his head into the trap without touching it and ate all the yams. They were good. Anansi was flustered. Once again, his trap did not work. So then the next day he dug a deep hole, a very, very deep hole, deeper than Snake was long. And he dug and he dug and he dug. Can you dig it? Can you dug and he dug? We can dig it. You can dig it. We can dig it. Can you dig it? Oh, wait a minute. Flashback to a song from another era. And then he greased the sides of the hole. And he put in the bottom of it bananas, not just bananas, bananas. That's when they're really good. And he put the bananas in the bottom of the hole and he hid out of sight. And sure enough, Snake came along and he saw the pit and he saw the bananas at the bottom of the pit and he saw the green sides. He chuckled to himself. I don't know how a snake chuckles, so you can imagine that. Donald, you can ponder on that. And he raised himself up and just lowered just enough of him into the pit to swallow the bananas whole. And then he pulled himself back up by the muscles of his body, and he didn't get trapped in the hole. Now, by now, Anansi is furious because he has spent the better part of a week trying to trap Snake so he can take Snake back alive to the Tiger King and get all the stories named after him. And he's frustrated. So Sunday morning, he goes down by the riverside to get some water, and there's Snake. Snake peeps his head out of his hole. He looks at Anansi and he says, "I'm very vexed with you. You've been trying to capture me all week long, and I don't like it at all." No. You see, there's a very good reason for that. There's a very good reason for that. You see, I've been trying to prove something all week long, and that's what the traps are for, because I wanted to prove something. And what were you trying to prove? Well, I was trying to prove that you're the longest animal of them all in the forest. That you, Snake, are the longest one. Of course I'm the longest one. Yeah, but that's what I've been telling everybody, but who listens to me? I'm just a Anansi the Spider. I'm the weakest of them all. No one pays attention to me. When I whisper, no one listens, and when I shout, everyone laughs. I mean, who's gonna pay attention to me? I was just trying to prove you're the longest of them all. I mean, I'm quite sure you're longer than that bamboo tree over there on the other side of the river. Yes, I am. Yeah, that's what I said, but everybody wants proof, and I'm just trying to get some proof. That's all I'm trying to do. That's why I laid the traps. I'm just trying to get your attention so I can prove that you're the longest of them all. Well, I am the longest. Yeah, but I know, but I got to prove it. I got to prove it. Well, go get that bamboo tree and bring it back here, and I'll show you that I'm the longest. So Anansi, they can float on water. He skidded across the water. He cut down the bamboo tree. He skidded back across the water. He laid the bamboo tree down. He cut up all the branches of the bamboo tree, and he laid it right next to Snake. He said, "Now, Snake, just stretch yourself and see if you're longer than the bamboo tree." And so Snake started trying. He said, "Wait, Snake. There's a problem. What's the problem?" Well, see, every time you try to stretch, your tail moves up And that's not really, you know, a lot. I can't really measure you that way. We got to keep it. He said, well, then tie my tail to the bottom of the bamboo tree. Stupid spider. Well, you should. I said, tie my tail to the bottom of the bamboo tree. Okay. So he tied the snake's tail to the bottom of the bamboo tree. He said, I need you to stretch. Come on, stretch. And the snake began to stretch. He said, come on, stretch. And he tied the middle of the snake to the bamboo tree. He said, so to hold you in place. So I need you to stretch so much that you have to squint your eyes shut and just stretch. And so the snake started stretching and stretching. And he was almost to the end of the tree, and Anansi tied his head and neck to the top of the tree. He said, wow, you might be longer than the bamboo tree. No, you're not. Bamboo tree is longer. Well, just untie me, and we won't tell anybody about this. No, I don't think so. I gotta take you back to the Tiger King, because that was the deal. See, I have to take you to the Tiger King, and when I take you to Tiger King, he's going to grant me the thing that I asked for most. And so everyone was sitting around laughing because they just knew Anansi would not be back, and they were just and the frog ribbit, ha, ha. And the birds were tweeting. I don't tweet. Oh, yes, I do, but that's another thing. Okay, so, and the birds were tweeting, and some were caw, and then Anansi comes, and he has this big web, and behind the end of the webbing is snake tied to the bamboo tree. And he brings it before the Tiger King and said, I've done as you asked. I've brought you snake alive. So now all the stories will no longer be tiger tales. There will be Anansi tales, for I know that you're an animal of your word. And Tiger, although flustered, angry, and greatly disappointed that he would no longer be the name of all the stories, he assigned all the stories over to Anansi. And to this day, be you spider, be you snake, be you bird, bee, or human beings, all the stories belong to Anansi. And to this day, all the stories are called Anansi tales. And this is an example where, once again, it's not how strong you are. It's not how strong you are physically. It's how strong you are mentally. And when you have the right mental fortitude, there's almost nothing you cannot do. Asante.
Asante. Thank you, Baba. Yeah, lovely. Absolutely. I wondered what happened. I really did. Right, so we're going to Greece now. We're going to Despina. After that, we go to Scotland, which is Donald. So Despina. Yeah, there you go.
I don't have a story for you today, because, you know, the stories we pick, well, they have to reflect our emotional state of the moment. They have to talk to us so that they can talk to people. And I didn't have a story for this particular day, but I do have a wee poem I read in Greek by Ellie Stourna. I have read you her poetry before.
Right.
And this girl's words, they just speak to me every time. So I asked for her permission and I translated it into English. And it talks about every one of us that are involved with stories in one way or another. And it also refers to all people in general, because we're all stories. That's what we are. So, by Ellie Stourna. Everything we now live will one day become history. Everything that hurt us will be history. Everything that scared us will one day be history. Our loves will one day be history. Our successes and our failures, history. Everything we've lived in the past few years is already history. History we do not yet possess the tools to process and digest, but history. And behind every piece of history, there are thousands of small, very small stories that are big, very big for those who live them. Because behind every pandemic, every war, every grand or horrible historic moment, beyond history books, official sources, narrations, there are the real, small, but in reality, very big stories of the people who lived them. Everything we now live will one day become history, but until it becomes history, let us live it. Ευχαριστώ.
Oh, oh, thank you. Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. And when you write a poem, you have to write a bit about yourself sometimes. And it's more than stories. The emotion of the moment within the poem is always a part of the personality that writes it. It's a deeper thing than the storytelling and everything else. And that was lovely. And thank you very much. I absolutely love having the poem from time to time. I really do. I think it's a great thing to have here. And I know you're all preparing to fly off to Morocco and everything. And if I don't see it before, you're going to be all there and be lovely and sunny and beautiful. So, right. So we're going over to Donald. Now, has it got snow up your ways, mate? Or
No, it's a bit wet and windy, a bit like myself. You know, but yeah, we've not had much snow this year. Actually, I think the south of England have had more snow than us.
Oh, we're not getting much snow. We're getting a sprinkling.
Yeah,
the Swedes as a nation have 192 different words to describe snow. Right. And so us mere Englishmen, I think we've got about 12. So just a little sprinkling is all we're getting, you know.
Anyway, on to my story. James V. James V became King of Scotland when he was aged 2 years old, king of a whole country. Of course, he had people to look after the affairs of the country until he was old enough to look after it himself. But of course, by this time, he was bored to tears with palace life. And he decided that he was going to start to go out and see what it was like in the outside world. He'd lived in such an enclosed life, such a cocooned life in the palace. He didn't really know what was outside. So he started to put on a disguise and wander round his kingdom. Well, one day he was doing just that, wandering around his kingdom, and he came to a place called Cramond. And he was passing through Cramond. He got to this other side of the village, and just passing through the woods at the other side of the village, he was accosted. He was jumped by 5 robbers. Well, James, he had been cooped up in that castle for a long time, and one of the things that he did to pass the time was sword fencing, and he was very, very good. And he took these guys on, 5 of them, his rapier in one hand and his dagger in the other, and he fought bravely. But against 5 men, he was getting tired, he was losing his energy. But from the window of a nearby cottage, there was a man called John Howison, and John Howison spotted what was happening. And John Howison grabbed his sword and went out and to help this traveller who was being attacked. Now, the king had his rapier and his dagger, but John, he was more of a broadsword man. The sort of sword you would see in Braveheart, you know, and he swung his sword with great skill as well. And they fought and they fought and they fought until eventually 2 of the robbers lay dead. And the other 3, well, they were injured, but they escaped. They ran away. They were no match for these 2 guys. Well, the robbers weren't the only ones that were injured, because
when the king was holding his dagger, the robbers were trying to knock it out of his hand with their swords, and his hands were cut. And John Howison said, "Come back to my place, come back to my cottage, and I'll clean your wounds." And that's what happened. He went back to John Howison's cottage, and John Howison washed the king's hand. He washed the blood off, and he bandaged them as best he could. And as they were doing it, they were talking away, and the king said to John Howison, thank you very, very much. Thank you you saved my life." "Oh, it was nothing," said John. He said, "I would do that for anybody at all." And the king says, "Well, yeah," he said, "do you know, if you could have anything, and anything you wanted, what would it be? What would make you happy?" And of course, John Howison, not knowing that this was the king he was talking to, he said, "Oh, you know, I'm a farm labourer, and I work very hard on the farm, and I get this wee cottage to live in, and I don't get much money, and I would love to be my own boss. What I would love is my own farm." "Well," said James, he said, "you know, I worked at Holyrood Palace." "Really?" said you're joking, come on." He said, no, I work, that's where I work. I work in Holyrood Palace. And he said, "Well, there's going to be a big party tomorrow night, and if you come to the back door, I'll let you in, and I'll introduce you to the king." "No, you can't." "Honestly, I work at the palace. I can introduce you to the king, and you never know what might happen." "Oh, well, okay then." And off James went. And John Howison sat in his cottage thinking, "I wonder if that guy was for real. I wonder if he... well, I might as well try it. I mean, all he can do is chase me away from the back door of the palace." So sure enough, 7 o'clock the next night, just as James had told him, be at the back door of the palace. He knocked on the door, and James opened the door. "It's you! You do work here! I was ready to get kicked out. I was ready to get chased away." No, of course I told you I work here. Come in. And he took him through the back kitchens, up the stairs, past the butler's pantry, and to the door of the main hall. And John Howison said, "Look at all these people. They're dressed so finely, but where's the king?" "Ah," said James, "the king, you'll spot the king because he is the only one wearing a hat." And John Howison looked around. He couldn't see anyone wearing the hat. And then he looked at James. And he said, "You're tricking me, because I don't see anyone else wearing the hat. The only people that are wearing the hat is me and you." "You? No, come on, seriously, you?" James took his hat off and said, "Yes, I am the king. I'm King James V. You saved my life, and you said your dearest wish was to have your own land. You washed the blood from my hands. I'm going to put a farm into your hands." And King James gave him acres and acres of land, and he stocked it with cattle and sheep, and he gave him arable fields to grow corn and anything else that he wanted. He was a very happy man. And King James did a lot of these good deeds. James V, a lot of these good deeds he did for people. And he still wondered, even after that, he still wondered his kingdom, just seeing how his kingdom was run and what he could do for these people. And in 1822, King George V visited, sorry, King George IV visited the area of Cramond. And in the area of Cramond was Sir Walter Scott. And Sir Walter Scott told King George this story. And he introduced him to one of John Howison's descendants. And legend has it, if you meet a king and you're a Howison, you must wash his hands. And that's what the descendant of John Howison did. He washed King George's hands. And if you ever meet a king, wash his hands for him, because you never know what you might get in return. Thank you.
Well, that's a lovely story, Donald. And there's a couple I know along the same lines, but I've never met a king, but I have met a Prince of Wales.
Oh, well.
Up in Wales. And the Prince, our current king now, King Charles III, is slightly shorter than I am, because I'm 5'10", so he's a little bit shorter than I am. But I don't think
Did you say to him, you're not as tall as you look on the telly?
No, I probably wouldn't bother washing his hands, because the SAS security guards would probably pick you up and turn you upside down and shake you a bit, actually, if you got that close to it.
Well, that's what John Howison expected.
Yeah. Right. Now then, I've got a few gaps in my list. So Keith, I can see that you're here, but I can't see you. Valentina, I can see that you're here. I can see your face. Are you doing a story this evening? No, you're not doing a story. Keith, have you got one for us? You can nod if you like.
No, I'll leave it tonight. Thank you very much. I'm just here to listen.
Okay. John Rowe, I can see your nose upwards, but I can't see any more than that. Are you doing poetry or story tonight? I think he's asleep.
Or his image is frozen.
So while he's asleep, Despina, have you got the size of his hat?
John,
Yeah. No,
John,
don't
wake up.
Don't wake him up. It's all right. Susan from South Africa. I can see you again, and you haven't been here for a couple of weeks. It's lovely to see you again. South Africa must be really hot and sunny in the middle of your summer there and everything else. Are you doing a story tonight? You want to do a story tonight?
Yes.
Right, okay. So I'm going to go, right. Right, Lucy, are you doing one tonight? Lucy Anderson Wood. Are you doing his...
I have never told a story. I'm not a storyteller. I just like listening. Thank you.
Right, I know, but I just want to give everybody the opportunity. And everybody knows you're a famously published authoress and you do poetry and all sorts of things. So.
I don't do poetry. I think you're getting me mixed up with someone else. I am an author, but I've never done poetry.
Oh, I was told you did a bit of poetry from time to time. Yeah, so,
No.
well, anyway, never mind. I'm quite happy. Your books are scientific, academic more books, aren't they? More than they are novels or stuff.
Yeah, it's from when I was a speech and language therapist. So it's for people who work with children and adults who have social communication difficulties like autism and things like that. So how to help them to communicate. Yeah.
Well, you ever worked with the average alcoholic Morris man? Because they have all those forests.
Not till now, no.
Yeah, because that is the
Hey,
fault
Mike.
I know of many people. Okay, so socially inept and bad communicators. That's the average Morris man. Okay, and women. To be fair, I don't want to be sexist about this. Okay?
Woe
Right.
betide you be sexist.
In her own
So,
way, Lucy does spin a tale. She tells the tales of the wonderful festival that's coming up in Marrakesh.
I've never heard of it. What's happening?
Aren't you coming, Mike?
No, I'm not coming. I went over in November. Amy's coming for me. I can't get away for that length of time for various personal reasons. That's all. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So I'm going to tell this story, and then Who have we got left who's actually going to tell one tonight? Keith, you said
Susan.
no. John,
Susan.
right. I'll do
Susan.
one, and then John, you do one, and we'll finish off with you, Susan. Is that okay? So that would be the order. Then I think we're coming to the end of it. So following on from your stories, Donald, there was a king of England, and he was the second Henry. And he was along here on the Welsh Marsh, and the Welsh Marsh is where England meets Wales, and there's a river called the River Severn. And the River Severn in those days, and there still is in many parts, was the border between the two nations. But he was king of both. And he had a beautiful, beautiful queen. And in the queen, she had a little ring. And the ring had been put there by the king as he looked into his eyes and said, I can't believe how someone as beautiful as you has agreed to be my wife. And she kept it there. But as they made the crossing over the river between two towns called the Welsh Pool and the New Town, well, the New Town came a long way after time. So the next town that goes up the river is a place called Llanidloes. Llanidloes is how you say it in the Welsh. And in the English, you call it Llanidloes because it hasn't got an English name. But they were crossing the river there. And as she went over, the queen, she tumbled and she fell into the water. And as she came up out of the water, the ring on the left hand, on the third finger on the left hand, had disappeared. It had gone. Well, she was absolutely distraught, and she stopped the king and she burst into tears, and she turned around and said, my wedding ring has gone into the river. Well, the king himself got off his horse and went to see if he could look, but the River Severn is quite deep and was quite sharp. But of course, he said, a golden guinea to the person who can find the ring of my wife. A golden guinea in them days would buy you a house and a farm and 3 horses and servants and all sorts of things. So they all piled into the water. And of course, the water, when you get lots of people, all muddies up. And it was getting worse and worse. But this is the River Severn. It was named by the Romans, Sabrina. And there's strange places to this day on the River Severn. There's dark holes and there's light holes, and it twists and it turns. And if you know where to sit quietly, they say that the birds talk to the trees, or maybe it's the trees talking to the birds. But just along from there, there's another legend, and it's called the legend of the Water Maid. And the Water Maids, well, if you go along and you look round in the towns, and I saw one just a couple of days ago, they've got bright ginger hair. And if I look sideways to you, their nose comes out a bit and their chin comes up a little bit like that. Just as it would be for the same as the River Salmon. And the river and the fish salmon, the River Salmon. And just here on the cheek, there's a slight mark, a scar. And I'll tell you the story about that one day, is how a salmon got caught on a hook. And it pulled out of the water, it turned into a water maid and back again. So just here, the water maids, they've got brightly tied back ginger hair. The nose comes forward with the chin, and they have a scar. And as they dive into the water, they dive and they turn into a fish. They turn into what you would call a large salmon, but it's not a water maid. The outside changes, but the inside is still the same. And this young girl, she dived in upstream, and she came down to the soldiers who were all looking and everything else, and she saw something glinting under the boot of one of the soldiers, and she picked it up and she turned around and she went back upstream. She didn't go downstream, and she back upstream, and just behind the tree, well, she thought she was behind the tree, she leapt out of the water and turned back into a young adult female. Of course, she wasn't wearing any clothes, and out of sheer embarrassment, she picked up her clothes and put them all on as quick as they could. But the soldiers, they'd seen her. The soldiers, they'd seen a young, beautiful young lady jump out of the water, and they weren't looking everything else. They were just looking at the beautiful young lady. But she came round the corner and she went up to the Queen and she got down on one knee, because that's what she did. And she said, I found this. Is this what you're looking for? And the Queen, she danced a little jig and she said, look, Henry, he's found my ring. She's found my ring. Look. And she picked it up, and sure enough, it fitted exactly. And the king came over, and he was an older man by then, and he sat down and he said, "Tell me your story, young mate. Tell me how you found my wife's ring." And she said, "I was just paddling around and I found it." And the king looked at her and she looked straight back at the king, and the king looked round and he knew that on the borderlands can mean that one place meets another, but it can also mean that various doors open in various different ways. But he'd made a promise, and he picked up a golden guinea, and her father came round and she looked at the little girl and she looked at the father and said, "I'm not going to give you this golden guinea. Tell me where your farm is." And she told then about how her grandfather farmed the side of the river, the west side of the river, for a little piece of land just between Llanidloes and Welshpool. And the king called a scribe and he wrote a document that day, and it's signed and dated and his seal is on it, that any of the produce that comes from that land would be tax exempt. For this land would be no taxes would be paid for his lifetime and the lifetime of his issue on the throne of England and the United Kingdom. Now there's a piece of land that's never been for sale since 1221. It lies on the west side of the River Severn between Welshpool and Llanidloes. It's owned by the same farmer. Well, it's owned by the same farmer. It's owned by the farmer's got the same surname as the grandfather of the little girl who jumped into the River Severn and found a wedding ring. Right, so there's a little story. So now we're going to do John Rowe, and then from John Rowe, we're going to go to Valentina, no, to Susan to finish. That's what we said, wasn't it? Right. See, when I start telling stories, I forget me betting list. So, right, John Rowe, you're next, and then Susan from South Africa after that. Okay, John?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
That's okay, because I'm doing it on my phone and it just doesn't, I can never find it. Well, I'm doing this one partly for Babasi because last Monday was Martin Luther King Day and a public holiday in the States. And I wrote this years ago when bus passes for ancient persons in Britain became, they used to be just for your home county, but then they became nationwide. And I remember I was doing a gig at Warwick University, and I got off this and I hadn't looked up where Warwick University was before I got on the train to Warwick, and I found it was in fact in South Coventry or something.
Yeah.
So I had to get from one to the other, and so I rang up Central Control, which was one of my offspring sitting at home who had the computer. I said, "Find out how I can do this," and so I had this bus pass that I'd never used before, and I got on the bus, and it was the day they actually became nationwide, and the poor driver hadn't the faintest idea what it was, but he let me on anyway. So I wrote this poem. Yesterday, I used my nationwide bus pass for the first time. The driver punched me out a ticket and wanted no money. Free at last. Free at last. I'm over 60, traveling free at last. Yesterday, 40 years ago, on a hotel balcony in Memphis, Martin was cut down by a bullet in the land of dreams, free at last. Free at last with the right to bear arms, they were free at last. And the Northern Hemisphere burst into flame. Paris, Madrid, Grosvenor Square, Barclay and Watts. You didn't need a weatherman to know that state and country, bank and corporation could transform a nation, whatever we did, free at last. Free at last, free to exploit us. They were free at last. At best, we're expelled from our schools and colleges. At worst, our spokesmen and women were jailed or executed. Free at last. Free at last, free to incarcerate. They were free at last. Now, After 4 decades of absorption, we have relinquished our power to Health and Safety Inspectorate, who force us to erect fences around our celebrations and steward the revolution in high visibility flak jackets. When the war happened, despite a march dwarfing anything seen from the windows of the US Embassy in London in 1968, when the British public saw on television for the first time police drag protesters through the lines and kick 7 bells of hell out of them, no one set fire to the city. No one blockaded the ports and airports. No one burst into Parliament and stuffed flowers down the throat of the Prime Minister. Free at last. Free at last, free to be sidelined. We were free at last. Now I address conferences between visiting prisons and pretending I can influence policy because I'm some kind of artist while traveling for free on the nation's buses. Ironic, isn't it, that it should be buses where we are free at last. Free at last. And Rosa, with your pass, you would have been free at last.
Hey, Mike, I just got to jump in there real quick. Thank
Go
you,
on.
John Rowe. That poem is extra special to me. And we're still working on it so we can say resoundingly for all Americans, free at last, free at last. Asante Sana, thank you very much for that.
Well, that's okay, Baba. But I heard a fellow called Barack Obama ask this question about your Bill of Rights and that. And it starts off by saying, we the people. And the next thing he said was, who's that mean then? And I thought that was lovely. I thought
Yes,
that was really,
yes.
really lovely. Yeah.
I agree with you there. Yes, I do.
Yeah. Right, Susan from South Africa. We talk about the trials and tribulations of a nation, where every nation should bring gets a great man at one point in its history, and you maybe had the greatest of us all. So.
Yes, Mike, long way to go. We've come a long way since '94, but we have a long, long way to go before things will be even slightly where it should be. But it's still the best place in the whole world. I will tell you, if you all come and visit here, you will be loved, you will be welcome. My son came home recently for a visit, and he said the first thing that got him is when he arrived at the airport was the buzz and the friendly and the, hey, where now, how are you, welcome home. So yes, you're all welcome, come and visit.
Well, it's on the plans to. It could be to do with a cricket match, but we'll see how we get on. Okay?
Good, and we always.
Crispin, I'll explain what cricket is to you someday. Okay.
Okay. We have open house here. If you ever need a place to crash in Johannesburg, all of you are welcome. Okay. Right.
Well, you don't know what you're saying. Lucy Anderson Wood said that 60 storytellers are all going to Morocco. You just be careful.
Fantastic. Okay, we'll do it. We'll do it. It will be great. So I want to tell you also, seeing that tonight is the theme is about kings and tax-free land and things like that. Quite impressive. By the way, in Baba, your story was amazing, even without visuals. It was great to hear your voice. So fantastic. But let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was a very mighty king, and he was sitting in this beautiful room in the top of a tower with his trusted advisor. And they were eating rice cakes with honey. He overlooked his beautiful city and his people down there. And oh, how wonderful. And as he was eating his rice cake with this beautiful honey, a drop of honey dropped onto the windowsill. And his advisor saw this and he said, my lord, your eminence, don't you think perhaps that we should wipe up this honey? No, 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 said the king. We will leave it to the servants, my friend. It is not our problem. And they kept on looking and talking. In the meantime, because it was such a warm, warm day, the honey started melting. And it ran down the windowsill and dropped onto the paving below. And a fly that was buzzing around saw this drop of honey and landed on it and started slurping. And little gecko saw the fly, and of course he attacked. And then a cat saw the gecko, and the gecko jumped. The cat jumped on the gecko, and a dog saw the cat and the dog started fighting. And the advisor looked down at all this and he said, Majesty, my dear Majesty, there's now a fight down there between a cat and a dog. Don't you think that we should call an animal keeper? No, no, my friend, said the king, that is not our problem. And they continued with their conversation. In the meantime, the cat's owner arrived and the dog's owner arrived, and they started squabbling and arguing. And the cat's owner said, your dog, wah, wah, wah. And the dog owner said, your cat, wah, 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 wah. And they started punching and hitting each other. And the advisor said, Your Majesty, there are now two people down there having a fight. Don't you think perhaps we should call the police to restore order? No, 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 said the king. My friend, that is not our problem. Soon the wives of the cat owner and the dog owner arrived, and they started defending their husbands, and their friends arrived and they took side, and the cat owner's friend said, but the cat, and the dog owner's friend said, but the dog, and this argument got bigger and bigger. Eventually, the police arrived, and the police, being so fond of pets, one side chose the cats and the other side chose the dogs. And eventually there was an argument between the cat and the dog and the cat owners and their wives and the friends and the police. And then, of course, because this got so out of hand, the military arrived. But the military also decided to choose sides, and soon there was a civil war. And the king, of course, with his trusted advisor, had to leave the country and had to live in exile. People died, the city was burned, hospitals were burned to the ground, the education system collapsed, and eventually there was nothing left. 10 years later, the king and his advisor had an opportunity to go back to their beautiful city. The king stood, looked at the remains of the palace, looked at what was left of his city, and looked at his advisor. And he said, my friend, you know, maybe that drop of honey was our problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, good, good. I'm afraid it's a story that's told in many countries about many wars. It is a lovely story well told. Now, I think I've got to a point where everybody who wanted to tell a story or do something has done something.
Mike, it's Valentina. I was wondering if I could change my mind.
Of
Could I
course.
tell a story?
I've never met a woman who hasn't changed her mind at some point, mate.
Mike said that.
Well-
None of the rest of us said that. Mike said
No,
that.
I said that. I said that.
That's
Carry on,
okay.
Valentina.
That's okay. Because I was reminded of this when John was reading his poem, because one of the last times that I was on, John recited a poem about a blind person using the subway. And I was, I thought about that a few times since I've been, with you guys. And I decided that the next time John Rowe was on, I would tell my subway story. Because as a blind person, it is challenging to use the subway, but it was also a lot of fun. And so this story came to mind because of the poem that John recited a couple of times ago when I was out. So I was married for a long time before my marriage broke up. And the whole time we had a beautiful car because we liked cars, and my ex drove a car, and there was always a car at my disposal. So whenever I wanted to go somewhere, it was there. And I never, although I did use the bus and systems, in the city that I lived, there was no subway because we only lived an hour from Toronto. So if there was nothing happening in Hamilton on a Friday night, we went to Toronto and saw the shows or whatever. But my ex was also very cautious. So like, oh, you shouldn't use the public transit in Toronto. It's dangerous. It's too busy. It's too big. It's too noisy, whatever. And I got indoctrinated that way. But in the meantime, my blind colleagues from school all used the subway that lived in Toronto. So anytime I went there, he'd be worried about me going on the subway. And, I would go on the subway with him, but I was terrified of it. So fast forward to the time when my ex and I parted our separate ways, I found myself wanting to move to Toronto because there was more opportunities to do writing and storytelling, which is what I like to do. But now I have a problem. I got this lovely apartment in Toronto and, my friends are there and whatever, but what am I going to do about traveling? So I remember the first time I was there by myself and there was no recourse to use a car. My friends and I decided we're going to go shopping or somewhere. I can't even remember where we were going. Now, the two of them have guide dogs. So they decided they were going to teach me how to use the subway. Well, it's busy. It's noisy. I go down the stairs and it's like concrete. Everything's echoing. And I have no clue where I am. It's like being in a big fog. So we go down another set of stairs. Now we're standing at the platform and the train comes roaring up and I am petrified. So each of them grab one of my hands. The subway door opens and they go 1, 2, 3. And the two of them with their guide dogs pull me physically onto the subway. That's how scared I was. But after that, I decided I do have to figure out how to get around. So I got a mobility instructor and I did learn how to get along. She showed me the safe ways to use the subway and whatever. And believe it or not, I got to enjoy going on the subway because I would always meet the strangest people. And it's about some of these people that I want to share the stories. One time I'm sitting on the subway and this woman that I don't even know or whatever sits down beside me, starts telling me her life story, the trouble she's having with her mother-in-law, and says, you should come and meet my mother-in-law because she can't see either and maybe you can help her learn to walk around the subway. And I'm thinking, no, I'm not getting involved in that. I don't know you, blah, blah, blah. And so I was too scared still then, but I would, so that was, the first sort of encounter I had, but I would meet people and all kinds of things would happen. Like one time there was a stage manager of a big show that was on. And he said, if you show up at the show tomorrow and give them my name, and he wrote it on a paper, I'll give you tickets and you can get in to see this show. So I did, and I got to see Jersey Boys and it was great. Another time I'm sitting on the subway and a guy that was managing a gym offered that I could go and get a discount on his gym. And I did, and I went and I worked out for a while and that was fun. Another time I'm sitting on the subway and it's Ramadan and there's a custom that a Muslim person, a believer, should do something kind for someone less fortunate. So I'm just sitting there minding my own business and some guy slips a $20 bill into my hand, and I'm going, oh no, it's okay, you know, like I'm grateful that you, no, I have to do this. He said, this is one of the things that we have to help someone less fortunate. So out of respect for his beliefs, you know, I felt it was better just to take it. So like I would meet random people on the subway and, you know, get to know them. And, you know, it was interesting because if you went the same time of day, eventually you saw the same people, and I made a few friends that way. So the funniest time of all, though, was when I was going to one of my meetings with the writers at the downtown library in Toronto. I had just left my home and was crossing the first intersection on the way to the subway, and this young man came up to me and said, oh, do you need help? And I said, sure, you know, and so we crossed the intersection, we got onto the bus, and we were chatting. And, you know, how's the weather? And, you know, the weather's nice and all this stuff. So he said, well, I have to go onto the subway, so let me help you onto the subway. And I said, okay. So we got onto the subway and we were talking about what he likes to read and the fact that I write and tell stories and so on. And he, you know, then in the meantime, we got off the subway. Now we're downtown where it's really busy. And one of the main subway intersections in the middle of the city at Yonge and Bloor. And he said, well, you know what, I'm going the same way. He said, why don't I walk with you, right? And I said, well, okay, like I know where I am now, so, you know. But he said, no, I'll walk with you. It's great, right? So we walked into the library, right to where I needed to be. He pulled out my chair and said, you know, it's really nice talking to you. I said, thanks, thanks for your help. It was nice talking to you. And he walked out and disappeared. And my friends are going, where did you find that good looking young man? They're going like, how on earth did you pick him up? I go, I have no, well, who is he? I go, I don't know. And then they're saying like, you don't know? This guy walks you right to where you're meeting and pulls out the chair and you don't know. And I said, that's right. And so I just thought I would share some of these stories because I was living with a transport truck driver at the time in Toronto, and he would just give me instructions of how to get to somewhere. And I would follow the instructions, go on the subway, learn how to, you know, engage in that intersection and figure out how to explore that area, sit down and have a coffee at a coffee shop that he would recommend or something, then turn around and come home. And I learned how to wander all over that huge city that has, I don't know how many millions of people. And even today, if I want to go somewhere in Toronto, I can just get an address, get the instructions, and I'm never lost. And it was one of the best things that I ever learned to do on my own as a blind person. And I always have a good time because you never know whether you're going to meet some young person that is kind and will help you, or a hockey team going to somewhere, or people, you know, half drunk on the way home from storytelling. It is just so exciting. So that's my story. Thank you, Joey Rowe, for
thank you,
Valentina.
Right. Before we go, Valentina, I've got one for you. Okay. Now, in my little community here in Shropshire, on my contacts on my phone, it says Matt the blind man. Now he comes into my pub and he's got a white stick. He hasn't got a dog. He's about 30 years old and he was a carpenter. And suddenly he woke up one morning, all his sight had gone. It was a medical condition and everything else. But he lived in the same community. So not this Christmas, the Christmas before, he went into the local pub and they all decided to go back to Matt's place. He's got a flat in the town, and a load of lads went there. They took a whole load of lager and everything else, and they drank all the lager. The next morning they got up. They're just lads. There's no girls involved. They were just having lads and everything else, right? So they didn't get a visitor then in his own place for about a month, right? So what happened was a young lady, she got talking to him and he turned around and said, why don't you come back to my place? We can have a quiet cup of coffee and da-da-da. And she went and she walked into his flat and said, why are all the lights on? And he said, what
Yeah,
do you
that
mean?
happens to
Why
me
are all the
all the
lights on? And
That,
she said, every light in the house is on, everything's on. You know, it must be costing you a fortune with the electricity. And he said, well, I haven't had an electricity bill this month, but it came the next day. And the next day, the electricity bill was 4 times as much as it ought to be.
oh, I
Right.
bet. Yeah.
You know, and you know, in these times now, how expensive it is and everything else. So what Ingrid did was, and I've done this, I'll say to my credit as I put my hand up, she said, I'm going to have a secret point. Right, so when you go up to the bar, and there was 3 of us, so the round was 4 pints of beer. You add another pint on. So instead of paying for 4 pints of beer, you pay for 5 pints of beer, and that extra £4 goes to Matt the blind man's electricity bill. And then
That's
finally,
very kind of you.
there will be enough. There will be enough money to
Yeah.
pay off his electricity bill, and that'll be the end of it. But nobody will know who it is because it's called the secret point. So nobody will know. All you have to do is to say, instead of buying 3 gin and tonics for Lucy Wood and a bottle of whiskey for John Rowe, whatever, and whatever Suzanne, probably a gin down in South Africa there. So when you buy a round of drinks, you just add a drink on and you say, give me a secret pint for Matt the blind man's electricity bill. Right? Within 3 days, they got so much money. He had a tab behind the bar that lasted him a month.
Good for him.
Because
Good for you.
everybody just paid his electricity bill off. And so what she decided to do was to give him a treat. So when the next electricity bill came in, she just went and paid it. So he hasn't
Wow.
all through this, crisis and everything else. There was enough money there to give him a month's electricity bill. And from time to time, people still go out and say, chuck a secret point in. And that's what happens to this day. And I think it's a lovely little story about my community. And if you ever want to tell it about, just make it up and tell it about somebody about yours.
No, that's awesome. And you know what? I have problems with my lights all the time until I teach people turn off the lights when you leave. And they have a royal fit because they're going like, I'm leaving you in the dark. And I'm going like, so?
So yeah, exactly.
Like, so what? It doesn't matter because I can have a light on for, I can have a light on for a week. Yep.
Yeah,
I get
absolutely,
it.
because you won't notice at all. Actually, it was just something I thought. It's as I'm sat here tonight in front of the screen here in Shropshire, that happened in my local community down here. It's a lovely little story that I have told once or twice, but I don't tell it very often. It's about
Well,
the Scouts
people are
and the
very
Beer.
kind. Yeah, like people, what I learned from this is I'm not afraid to go anywhere. It's just the people I meet everywhere. Like there's so many stories that I have that I run into people, whether I traveled, like I've been across Canada 4 times by myself. And I like it because you never know who you're going to meet. And it's just great. I love it.
So you have a dog yourself?
No,
No.
no, I'm too self-centered for that. I don't want them paying attention to the dog. I want them to talk to me.
Oh, Valentina, one day we must meet face to face. We're going to have a lovely time when we meet face to face.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. You'll have to come over here or I'll have to come over there. Right, I think we've come to the end of this session tonight. I've had a lovely time. It's certainly not a work, it's a hobby, and I just look forward to these sessions every fortnight. And I couldn't do this without you fellas coming and doing what you do and chatting and telling stories and having a great time for now. So I'll hand you back to John Rowe. Just remember, John Rowe, your boss is sat here. Lucy is watching.
Yeah,
you.
well, yeah. Okay, I'm not going to say anything nasty.
Is that what I am? I hadn't realised I was.
No,
I don't think so.
Or she's even more important. She's the boss's missus. How about that then? You be careful.
No, we're all in it together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm
we are, yeah.
sinking fast. Right. Well, so what is coming up? Well, thank you. First of all, a round of applause for all of you that are told, and Mike Rust, who holds this every other Sunday together magnificently, and Waleed, who's flying the magic carpet.
Absolutely, Waleed as well. Yeah.
Thank you. And what we've got coming up, well, Tuesday, 5 o'clock UK time, is our wonderful Young International Tellers, open mic for young tellers, which hopefully will be a bit hybrid, will be a bit round the world, a bit in the cafe in Marrakesh. If some young tellers come in there, that'd be magnificent. And Friday, we have the wonderful Juliana Marin from Colombia. I don't know where she is now. You know, you never know with Juliana. You never know which country she's passing through. She's not a stay-at-home kind of lady. And so I first met her in the middle of Suffolk. And she had heard about the East Anglian Storytelling Festival, and she just popped along. And then I dropped her off, I think, in Birmingham, where she was catching a bus up to Scotland for a festival up there. And so she kind of in a state of perpetual motion. So where we're going to get the stories from on Friday, I don't know. But anyway, then next Sunday, for those, this is important. This is for those coming to the festival. We are having a Q&A, 7 o'clock. We're using the 7 o'clock slot. A Q&A for the festival, where Lucy, Mike, I, and possibly Zuhair, if he gets there, will be. We'll have what little knowledge we have at the festival, and we will attempt to answer your questions and probably fail miserably. But you're welcome to come along and test our resolve. No, seriously, it was very useful last year. And apart from all else, it's a chance for people that come to the festival to meet each other online, so they recognize each other when they come to the festival. We probably won't do introductions, because then that would take the whole 3 hours. It's going to be very much concentrate on Q&A. But meanwhile, great as always. I must apologize for my absence earlier and my falling asleep during the program, which I cannot deny, as we are on Zoom. But in my defense, I've done 6 hours of meetings on the festival today, because I had a program meeting with Zuhair in between 2 that Lucy was at. So I kind of festivated out. So no, I don't want an R. I just want an excuse for falling asleep.
I don't need an excuse, John. I don't need an excuse. I do it all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, but as I had an excuse, I thought I'd use it. I do it all the time anyway. But
anyway, so I'm alive enough now to shoot up to my local pub where Matt the Blind Man used to drink. Well, that's exactly what I'm going to do now. Okay. Because I've had a really long day. I had to go down.
I'm going to go do your request.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And I had to go to the Edgemoor down at Stroud at lunchtime, John. So I've had a lot of driving to do and everything else.
Oh, that's a long way.
Well, it's one of those. Right. Okay. Anyway, so good night, everybody.
Good night.
And I'll see you all in a fortnight's
To
time.
be continued until the next time.
Till the next time.
Thank you,
Keith,
Mike.
I've just heard I'm going. Keith, I've just heard I'm going to Whitby again. If you're about. Okay, you got to unmute yourself if you want to talk.
Yeah, yes, that's a bit Whitby. Yeah.
Yeah. So Whitby, for those of you, Donald, you probably know, is the week-long folk festival on the coast.
Yeah.
Up in Yorkshire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you been?
I've not been. No, it's always clashed with other things that. The only folk festival I really make is Cambridge, but Whitby,
Oh,
it's on my wish list.
right. Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. We'll see what happens. Okay. Susan, I'll see you from South Africa. I'm going to be away. I'm going to the pub.
Okay. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Everyone take
Good
care.
night. Bye.
See you when I see you. Peace.
Bye.